my name's Bruce Levi. For those of you who don't know me, I live in a small little village in a national park on the south coast of England, and spent a lot of time walking my dog. I left Brand Learning, who was acquired by Accenture a little over a couple of months ago. And whilst I was there for about 13 years. I'm now working as a freelance learning designer. And today I'd really like to share with you my perspective on learning design, and in particular, a word that, in my humble opinion, sort of neatly sums up what I think are two of the most important ingredients, or maybe you could call them dimensions, that make for high impact learning. But just before I reveal that to you, I just want to ask you all a question. And the question is, what does the word architect mean to you? Now, you can put this in the chat if you want to, or just think about it, mull it over in your head and think about what the word architect means. What comes to mind to you? Who are architects? What do they do? And I guess ultimately, how would you characterize an architect? So I've been thinking about this clearly, and I can imagine that when I asked you this question, one of the first thoughts or images possibly that sprung to mind was thinking about some of the iconic buildings that architects have designed. So I've put a few of those up here on the screen, which one or two of you might have thought about. They're the obvious things like the Sydney Opera House. That's the top right is the interior of the Guggenheim Museum in New York. And even if we go back many, many centuries, we've got the likes of the Parthenon in Athens. The one on the left, I personally particularly like. And for those of you who may not know what it is or where it is, it's called it's called the Dancing House, and it's in Prague. And it makes me think that when the architects were putting that together, that maybe they were down the road in a pub sampling some of the local Pilsner when they came up with that design. And it is a gallery and a museum, as you could probably imagine. But I think that's what we often think about. We think about the exterior. But actually, architecture is also about the interior. And so I've chose these two examples as a way of talking about how important it is not just to think about the imposing impression that great architecture creates when you're looking from the outside, but also how much needs to go into how you think and feel when you're actually in the space itself. So on the left-hand side, this is a capsule hotel in Tokyo. And one of the things that I think most of us like to do when we're, particularly when we're in a very small space, is read a book just before going to bed, or possibly when we wake up first thing in the morning. And so this hotel is called Book in Bed, and I particularly like the way, even for a small capsule hotel, which quite often has a very minimalist approach, they've really factored in on that. Whereas on the other side, this is the one of the walkways of the old TWA terminal at JFK Airport, which actually is now a hotel. And again, I think it's amazing how the architect has thought about this and said, how do you want someone to feel? What do you want them to be going on in their mind as they're walking down towards that aeroplane to get on that flight to wherever it might be, whether it's for business or leisure. And I love the way this walkway helps you empty your mind and of the past, and starts to allow you to start thinking about what that trip has in store for you. So the reason I'm sharing these with you is because, as Jamie introduced me as a learning architect, I think there are tremendous parallels between how we should be approaching learning as in the same way that building architects do. And so when you're next thinking about your next learning program or project, I would urge you to think about what's the role of your learning architect. Do you have one? How are they going to help shape that program? Because the architect's there to interpret the brief, whether that's an internal brief or that's something you're putting out to an external agency. But they really need to be able to dive into that and come up with that vision, and to be able to really focus on how it's going to feel. It's their job and it's our job as learning architects to really understand what's going to really matter to the user, to really focus in on that. And just like building architects, we need to consider all sorts of different dimensions. There's the practical side of things, there's the rational side of things, but equally and importantly, it's how people are going to feel, the emotional impact that we're going to be able to generate. And out of that, we create the blueprint. And once we've got that, then the question is, we still need a team of talented specialists who are going to help realize that dream. So in the same way that an architect will create and have a team around them, whether they're engineers or interior designers or carpenters, there's a whole raft of different people involved. Similarly, within learning, you're going to need a team of people, of copywriters or storyboard, of developers, of graphic designers, etc., to help realize that dream. So that's my first point that I really wanted to bring across, that from my perspective, when we come to designing learning, is to think like an architect and be a learning architect. So that's point number one. I'd like to, when I came up with this concept, it all started back a few years ago now, and if you'll forgive me, you'll let me indulge myself in a short story. But it was between Christmas and New Year, and I had a really stinking head cold, and I was feeling pretty miserable, and wanted to find something that could just lift my spirits a little bit. And I was living in London at the time. And I decided to go to the Design Museum and see what they had. And I went along there, and this is a photo from that day of a few years ago. And when I was there, I came across this exhibit or this collection, and it struck me. And I looked at it and investigated it. And it's a collection from folks just like you and me. And the question they were asked was, what sort of object would you put into this collection because it's had a real impact upon you? And when you look at all these different items, what they discovered, and I think you'll agree, is they all have sort of 2 or 3 things in common. The first one is that they're all really useful. They're all sort of things that people, and in the way that you use them, they're all really simple. And the second thing is there's some kind of beauty or some aspect of design aesthetics that has really appealed to them. And because of that, these have created a bit of a special memory for the people who chose those particular items. And so this got me thinking about what other products or services I might put into this collection. So you'll probably not be surprised to hear that, and you may have thought of this as well, that one of my things that I would put in is the original iPhone. And I think this is an obvious contender for 2 counts, really. First of all, is just the ease in which, and really the innovation they brought in terms of how we use and navigate around our computers and smartphones and the like, and set the standard. But also it was the attention to detail around the aesthetics and the design of it as well. So I think this would definitely go into my collection. But it doesn't have to just be technology or things today. The other piece which was sparked by me when I looked at the Underground, it reminded me of the Underground map. And in fact, this visual that you can see here is the first tube map design done by a guy called Harry Beck in 1931. And what I find extraordinary and clever about this is he realized that the best way to guide people around and help them navigate around the tube and all its complex lines and so forth was to strip out the fact of distance, and collapse that down into something that people could then use more readily. And this has now evolved, as I'm sure you're all aware, over quite a bit of time, but it really was the start of a great piece of design. And so I would have put this into the collection as well. So you're probably asking, where's this all leading to? So my last point that just to wrap this up is there are lots of quotes. I mean, I think learning is full of quotes, but this one I chose particularly because it resonates with this topic. So there's no doubt that people will forget what you said. People forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think this is the point when it comes to learning. And when we strip it all down, I think learning experience design is all about creating memories and creating positive experiences from those memories. Because if we can achieve that, it means that people are going to recall those and are then going to be able to apply them back into whatever situation that may arise. So there's lots of talk about human-centered design, user experience design, but when it comes to learner experience design, I like to think of it as, how do I create some positive memories for my learners, for my users, for my audience? And this can be whether it's in micro learning or macro learning, it doesn't really matter where that exists. And from my experience in the Design Museum, I realized that there are really only two dimensions to it. The first side is around, how do we engage people? How do we make it entertaining? There is the sort of overall aesthetics of it. How do we pull on people's emotions? I think being playful is common. I think sometimes we forget that actually having a little play and an element of surprise is really important for us to have fun. But equally, because it is about learning, we need to make sure that it's helpful, that it's useful, that it's informative, that we only give people what they want, then we make it simple. So I've summarized that as into two words. The word on the first part, there's two magic ingredients. The first one is creating something of beauty. And the second part is to create something which has utility. And when you combine these two, you get the catchphrase utility. So if there's one thing that I'd like you to take away today, is how can you bring utility into your learning experience for your users? Because I passionately believe that if you're able to do that, then people will have those positive memories and recall, and you'll help them change their behavior. So I'm sure you're all thinking, well, that's all well and good, but can you give me a couple of examples? And it's no coincidence that I genuinely believe that EdApp is a platform, is a service, is a vehicle to enable for amazing micro learning, which encapsulates and allows you to apply both the beauty and the utility in the work that you do. And I've been a big fan of theirs for several years now. I say that unashamedly. It's really true. And I'm going to show you in just a second a very short video from a piece of work that, not something I did, which I think really both showcases what EdApp is capable of, but also emulates and gives a good description of what I think utility can accomplish. So just watch this, and then I'll explain to you again why I think this is a good example. So I'm just going to play the video now. Hopefully it works. So very short snapshot there, but a couple of things I'd like to draw your attention to. I think one of the first things about EdApp, which distinguishes itself from maybe some other services, is it really was built for mobile first. And you see that quite clearly in the way that it's a thumbs first approach. And the overall user experience is just fantastic. And there is beauty in that. And as well as utility in it. I just love the way that you can just rub things out with your finger, or you can swipe left and right. And it's all, and then the graphics that have been used here have lifted up. It's kept it nice and simple. So I'll play it one more time in case you missed some of those features, but it is, in my view, a great example of bringing beauty and utility to life. Now that's the rubbing out feature. And that's just the swipe left and right. The great way and use of drag and drop. So I would really encourage anyone who's not used EdApp before to look into it, because I think with their suite of templates and ease of use, you can create something which is really going to have an impact with your users. And I love the fact as well that you can bring an element of surprise and delight with your learners through the use of things like their awards and so forth. So that's one example. Another piece of work that I worked on a couple of years ago was with Jack Daniels. And they came and asked the question, how can we give brand ambassadors and partners right across the globe a really meaningful understanding of our brand? So they really wanted to help anyone who had contact, who was involved in the marketing or selling of Jack Daniels, to get a rich and deep understanding of what this brand is all about. And so we created an online journey, which you could use on your desktop or mobile. And what, for me, distinguishes this and makes it both beautiful and has utility is, on the beauty side of things, it were little things that we did. So it's no coincidence that it's called Jack's Way. Jack Daniels is about Jack, the man who first created Jack Daniels, the brand. And so just little things like that help to sort of lift it and bring the provenance to it. We deliberately went all the way out to Tennessee to film some of the people involved in the making and shaping of this brand. And whilst that cost a few dollars, it really made the difference. And you can see the example there of Jeff Arnott, who's the master distiller, explaining how to do a tasting for one of the Jack Daniels variants. So it made a great difference. People loved it. It wasn't a short course, so it was made up of micro-learning elements. You could stop and start as you went, but to get through the whole thing was going to take you several hours. And we got incredible feedback. Thousands of people went through that. We did win a Brandon Hall Gold Award. I'm proud to be able to say. And you can also see that the our main client, Lottie, was really enthusiastic about what we achieved. So I think this is another example of using Butility to deliver amazing learning. So that's Butility. The third thing and final thing that I wanted to share with you, actually, one more thing, putting it into practice. So I think it's fine for me to sit here and say, use Butility, but how do you actually do that? So there are 5 things that I think it would be helpful for people to take away with them. The first one is you need to think like a craftsman. There's lots of science to learning these days, but there's equally, you want an equal measure or a measure of art and of creativity. And it's when you meld those two together that you can start to do this. So think like a tradesman or a craftsman in terms of when you're designing. The other thing is it's not always 50-50. Sometimes you're going to focus more on the beauty side, on the design side of things, and there will be other instances where you want to focus on the utility. And you can apply this at all levels, whether it's the overall design, whether you're creating a small resource, whether it's an EdApp course, whether it's in a workshop. It really doesn't matter. I think you can apply these same principles wherever you go. Having a creative theme or idea or some kind of hook to lift your communication and the way you talk about things, I think is really worth striving for. It doesn't have to be in the levels of an award-winning ad, but having some kind of creative theme around it is extremely important. And if you're struggling for this, I think a tip that I would give you is to look for metaphors or analogies, because quite often they can work and will allow you then to go on and put some design around that. Making things easy to navigate. And after I put this slide together, I realized maybe I should call it more about signposting. There's nothing worse as a learner if you suddenly get confused as to where you are. It saps your motivation, you lose attention. So don't forget, having great signposting throughout is going to be important. And last but not least, and it sounds obvious, but I'm not sure that we always do it, is get feedback from your audience. They will tell you whether it's working or not, whether they're feeling good about it. I think we all have a bit of a tendency to fall in love with our own ideas, and then are a little bit surprised when we share it with other people and they perhaps go, yeah, that was good, but perhaps not what I was looking for or what I might have hoped for. So share with people, get feedback, iterate as you go. It will stand you in great stead going forward. So that's utility. And then finally, just before I end, I thought I'd just share with you the theory behind saving the best for last. So this is a well-known phrase, and I'm sure you've all heard it and know it, but perhaps not always clear as to where it came from. So Daniel Kahneman is a psychologist, and he came out with the book Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. Some of you will have read him. And if you haven't, I strongly encourage you to do so. And it's a little heavy going, the book. So if you want to save yourselves a bit of time and do a bit of micro learning along the way, then on YouTube, you can find plenty of synopses that people have put together around Daniel Kahneman. And he came out with one point in particular, which is relevant to learning and how we learn. And that is his peak end theory. So what he established is that it doesn't matter how long an event is or what happens at every single point throughout that event or that experience, whether it's for an hour, a week, or 2 weeks, our memory of it and how we recall it is defined by 2 points only. And the first one, and probably the one that comes as no real surprise, is where you had that peak moment, that peak experience, that where it was either at its highest. It could also be when it was at its lowest, but obviously we were thinking about when it's at its highest. And the second most important point is at the end. And so when we're designing our learning, we need to be thinking about what is our finale, what's our peak point going to be, but also how are we going to finish? So whether it's no coincidence that at the end of a fireworks display, that's when the big rockets go off. It's no coincidence that at the end of a gig, that the clever bands play one of their most, the favorite song, one of the favorite song from their fans, because people leave just feeling great, feeling energized, feeling that was amazing. So I would encourage you to think about how we end, because sometimes I feel that some of our learning can end a little bit flat. and we need to avoid that. So another point to think about. So there's no such thing as a new idea, I'm afraid to tell you. I came up with the phrase Butility, but then when I went and did a little bit more research around it, I discovered I wasn't alone. You can decide whether I'm in good company or not. But it was actually Arnold Brunner was the first person I could find who, he was a US architect who came up with the phrase Butility when thinking about his town planning. He's in the top right. Simon Sadowski, pictured down there with his son, was a furniture or cabinet maker, and he branded one of his range Butility. And then there's Jasper Conran, the son of Terence Conran, the fashion and interior designer, who also talked about Butility when he comes to designing and making his things. So thank you very much. I know I've gone at quite a pace. I think I'm still within time. If there are any questions, Jamie, I'd be delighted to try and answer them.
Well done. Thank you, Bruce. That was really interesting. And I think Butility is certainly something I like to try and model myself as being both beautiful and practical in every way. So I picked up, there were some interesting questions. I think one of the first ones was you talked about the role of a learning architect. I was just interested, so I guess some of the people, who are on this call won't necessarily have access to a big group of, learning designers and architects and, business partners and, all of the other different teammates that you were talking about. And I think it was interesting because you talked about falling in love with your own work. What happens if you are in a discrete team, perhaps where there aren't many of you who are responsible for creating and distributing learning? How can you kind of divide and conquer? And what are some of the tips that you've got there, I guess, for smaller teams?
Well, I think if you're in a smaller team, you may feel that you don't have access, but I would encourage people to, you're doing it for a group. You're presumably creating this for somebody. And so engage them and go and talk to them and get their feedback. So that would be one thing.
Yeah.
I would also say there may be people who are not directly, either the end user or part of your team, but at least maybe still within your organization that you can reach out to. Mm-hmm. You may feel that there are people who are in a sort of tangential area. So you may, let's say, for example, you don't feel that you're particularly good at coming up with creative ideas, but you may know someone in the marketing department, someone in an agency who you can brainstorm with. So I think you can find people and see if you can get them to be part of your planning and part of your visioning at that early stage.
Great. And I guess if they need someone to help connect them in their business, Bruce, are you? I guess you're available for potential discussions if people want to talk about how they may be in.
Absolutely. If anyone wants to have a little brainstorm with me, just look me up on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to help.
Well, we're going to include your contact details at the end. I've got another question here from Horace, who is a bit of a champion because he had some problems with video and then he came back and now he's come in with some questions as well. So Horace, thank you very much. He wanted to know, and I think you touched on this around the balance between beauty and utility, and appreciating that that's a sliding scale. Is there a perfect balance, do you think, 80-20, 50-50, and how would people go about thinking about some of those things practically?
So I don't think I think that how would I put this? I think the challenge is not to think of beauty necessarily as just about design. Mm-hmm. Because I think that's possibly the trap. And the beauty element is really how it just makes you feel. And it sort of just touches. So it could be and one of the areas where I feel that we as an industry perhaps don't put enough emphasis on is copywriting. And so people will often say that looks great, but when they say that, do they really mean it just looks great, or does it read really well? I think there's a lot that we can do in helping something feel amazing by the use of great copy. So that would be one. I know I'm not answering the question perhaps exactly directly. I don't think there is a sort of ready-made answer for Horace on this. It's partly driven by what the challenge is, I guess, of what you're trying to achieve, who your audience are, what medium you're using, but it needs to have a bit of both, not necessarily one or. I don't think you can say that it's 80-20, 50-50. I'm sorry about that. Sorry, I can't give him a definitive answer. But
he could tell you, Horace, but he'd have to kill you, right? So I think it's too important a secret. So okay, so I mean, I think we're kind of getting close towards the end, but I'm interested just from from my perspective. You talked about your experience of Jack Daniels, but I know, Bruce, that you've worked with some fantastic brands, through your career. I wonder if you can talk about any other practical examples. Particularly, I think, I know that Jack Daniels' example included microlearning, but where people have been thinking about those short, sharp learning experiences, and maybe you could elaborate and share some stories around that for us.
Yeah, so this is something that I was actually a participant of rather than a designer for, but I think it was probably one of the best pieces of learning I've experienced. And I'll tell you a little funny story about this, but it was all around, I guess it comes under the umbrella of diversity and inclusion, which I know is very hot at the moment. This particular course, if I can call it that, was around unconscious bias, and the fact that we all have prejudices and so forth, and how can we at least be aware of them and therefore being able to do something about it.
Yeah.
And this was essentially a video-based course, and they had assembled together a lot of great people talking about it. And interspersed with that were some very clever questions and so forth. But what struck me about this, and I talked to the people who designed and delivered it, and they told me that it had fantastic feedback. And they went to the client and said, look, this is brilliant. And we're getting, people are loving it and going to the end of it and so forth. And the client said, yes, but we've got a problem. And they said, well, what do you mean we've got a problem? And they said, it's too good. And they said, what do you mean it's too good? Well, people are watching it and then they're re-watching it, or they're going to the extras and so forth, and therefore they're not working. And it just struck me as an example of, if you capture people and if you capture their hearts and you do it in a way that really is special to them, you can do anything. And so, and it was beautifully done, and it was nice and simple. In my book, it would capture those things. But I think it's a lovely story, because I often get asked, how long should a video be? And our attention span is shortening. I don't think our attention span is shortening. I think that what we're suffering from is that people are being distracted more easily. So that's you can hold someone's attention, provided you're better than the distraction. We can sit and watch a movie. The reason why people switch off to most YouTube videos is, frankly, after about 30 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever it is, we've had enough and we're distracted onto something else, and they're not holding us. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that was one example for me.
No, that's great. No, that's great, absolutely. And yeah, I think that's the age-old question, isn't it? We see that a lot when people talk about leaderboards. It's like, what do you go from encouraging people to learn every day to then starting to worry about their productivity and how much time they're spending learning these working? Our argument is always, if that learning has value and it's helping people to become better at their job, then let's encourage people to work every day. And let's encourage a culture of learning within every organization, because that's how we're going to skill up and meet the kind of future demands that we're all going to have to evolve into. Different organizations have different cultures, but we'll keep tooting that horn. So look, Bruce, this has been fantastic. For those of you who have more questions, you can get in touch. Sorry about the formatting here. I have to take ownership of that, not understanding the beauty and utility aspect. But if you want to hit my colleague Luke in Australia, USA, he's just Luke at EdApp. If you want to talk to me, then I'm Jamie at EdApp. And if you want to talk to the king of this particular party, Bruce, then you can hit him on that, Bruce Levi at open-path.co.uk. You can also find him and us on LinkedIn and connect with us that way. We're all, learning enthusiasts. Keen to have discussions, so please do connect with us, and carry on the discussion. We'll share the recording as well if you want to reflect on anything that Bruce has said. We'll look forward to hearing from you all. But Bruce, nothing left to say except thank you very much, and I hope everyone enjoyed the session.
So I can leave you with one thing, if you like, just to close off.
Bruce, this is your fireworks. This is your fireworks display finish, is it? This is the.
Well, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to try it. I don't know if it's going to work. But we're coming to the end of the year, and at the end of the year, there's always these things about what was the most talked about, what was the most done, etc., etc. So I think one of the things that's going to come up.
This is intolerable build up now. You muted yourself there, Bruce, just as you're about to say something incredible. I'm sure just to capture people's attention a bit more, but
exactly, because the phrase that the most common talked about phrase for 2020 is "you're on mute."
Very good, yes.
Okay, so with that, thank you very much.
Cheers, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Bye.